They need to sit down, negotiate, and address this crisis.
A major vote expected this week in the House, expected to escalate the standoff between Republican leaders and the White House. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy unveiling the bill just days ago that would raise the debt ceiling for a year and in return would cut federal spending, impose new work requirements for welfare recipients, and undo some of President Biden's policies.
All this after that headline-making week for Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee. Congressman Scott Fitzgerald serves on both House Judiciary and the Financial Services Committee. He joins us now from Washington. Congressman, like always, great to see you.
Good to see you. Good to be with you.
Speaker McCarthy says a vote is going to be on the floor this week on the debt limit on the new bill he has released. Does the Speaker have your support on this legislation?
Well, right now, I feel real good about where we're headed and am inclined to be able to support kind of the first act of a four-act play that I think is going to be playing out over the next couple of months. We're trying to get the attention of the White House and get the president to even pay attention. And pretty much same thing with the U.S. Senate, where they're not really engaged on much of what the House has been talking about. So we'll see where we're at. I know that they are making some changes to the package as we speak, and we'll be getting a temperature of where the conference is very soon.
Will there be enough votes from Republicans to pass the House?
That's the plan, to get to 218 and kind of move the bill along and force the president to the table. He's really been not engaged and continues to just talk about, show us your budget. Well, you know, it's not about the Republican House's budget. It's really about whether or not he is going to come to the table and negotiate on reductions in spending.
As you hinted at, this is dead on arrival in the Senate and at the White House. The White House wants a clean debt limit bill. Is there any scenario where you would support that at this point?
Not really, no. And I don't know about debt on arrival in the U.S. Senate. We saw some signs yesterday and comments from U.S. senators that were encouraging, saying, you know, we're going to let Speaker McCarthy kind of do his thing, but they like where the House is headed. And, you know, you may get to the point where there's a couple of those U.S. senators that might come on board. So, you know, I'm not giving up hope that the U.S. Senate wouldn't eventually get to something.
Let's talk about House Judiciary, which you are a member of. A bit of a contentious hearing this past week held in New York City talking about crime. Was this hearing in response to the indictment of former President Trump?
You know, our focus was to actually talk about crime and what's been going on in some of the larger urban areas throughout the nation. And obviously, New York was a great place to start. You know, we understand that DA Bragg had kind of launched into this unprecedented, bizarre kind of crossover between what's happening within the states and the district attorneys, the prosecutors at the state level, going after anybody and anyone they can at the federal level. So there's a precedent that was changed.
As you know, there are now lawsuits in this back and forth between Congress and the Manhattan District Attorney. Developments just this past week on a subpoena issued to a former prosecutor, also demands and documents and testimony from the DA himself. Curious, how far is Judiciary, the committee you're on, going to take this?
Oh, I think the back and forth that we saw between DA Bragg and Chairman Jordan is significant because, like I said earlier, it's precedent setting in determining whether or not a local prosecutor can actually elevate a case. And it was pretty clear that Jim Jordan won that lawsuit, tit for tat, I think. And now it's on the radar screens of the judiciary. So it's something that I think is going to continue to play out. But I just keep thinking, I mean, we've got 72 DAs in Wisconsin, and if one of them was going to launch off into suing an elected official at the federal level, there'd be a ton of pushback.
Do you anticipate the district attorney will be testifying before Judiciary at some point?
He was invited. You know, it's something that I think would be wise for him to do.
Before you go, Congressman, a lot of eyes already on 2024 and the Republican National Convention that will be here in Milwaukee. Curious, are you going to endorse in the presidential primary?
No, I mean, right now, what I've said in relation to the presidential and And there's a lot of people that are kind of trying to figure out, I think, just where President Trump and Ron DeSantis and where the field is going to be. But I'm really excited about the convention coming to Milwaukee. I'm excited about the debate that we're going to host as well. Once again, Wisconsin's right in the thick of it, being a purple state, and it's part of what I think makes Wisconsin great when it comes to politics, right?
It sure does make it interesting. Will you support former President Trump if he is the nominee coming out of Milwaukee?
Yeah, right now, I believe that President Trump is probably certainly leading the field. And you never want to cut off the voters before they're able to speak, especially in a primary, that open primary process that we have in Wisconsin. But it appears to me that right now, President Trump is kind of solidifying the base as we speak.
Who would you like to see run for U.S. Senate here in Wisconsin against Senator Baldwin?
Great question. A lot of discussion, not only in D.C., but I think back home, we're hearing names beyond who you typically would think of. Certainly, there are members of the House that are exploring the idea, and that's great. I'm not one of them, though.
Setting the record straight. Congressman Scott Fitzgerald. Congressman, like always, we appreciate your time and perspective.
Thank you. It's been good to be with you.
President Biden now expected also to announce his official re-election bid this week.
Up next, one-on-one at the port, cruising to a record-breaking year.